Our Grassroots political analyst, Matthew Hurtt, joins us on the Newsmaker hotline at 6:37. Matthew, thanks very much for joining us. Kind of a weird news day, as you know, Matthew. You are from Middle Tennessee, and we got hit with some very serious tornadoes over the weekend. I know that on a day like today, we have such a heavy heart, and our minds are clearly on those that were impacted by the tornadoes.
You know, Dan, and it's great to be with you and great to be with my friends in Middle Tennessee. I'm thinking about you guys, was in touch with my family and friends the entire time. Luckily for me, you know, nobody was too harmed and everyone is accounted for. But the great thing about Tennessee, and it's why we're called the volunteer state, is because Tennesseans step up, and we're already seeing the relief efforts. We're already seeing, as you've said in the last segment, you know, the instances where Tennesseans can help, can donate blood, can provide relief efforts, and the governor has stepped in. And that is exactly what we expect from Tennesseans.
Yep, and we have gone ahead and posted all of that to our social media pages. How you can help, you can find it on my Twitter feed at Dan Manda Show or WTN's social media pages as well. We have a lot of politics to get to. First of all, I was telling folks at the end of the previous segment that some new polling out there shows that Nikki Haley, this is the headline, Nikki Haley absolutely wrecks Biden by a whopping 17 points, and Donald Trump tops Joe Biden by 4, and Ron DeSantis would be in a tie with Joe Biden if the election were held today. One of the things that they say is that Joe Biden, according to this Wall Street Journal poll, is at an all-time low approval rating. So, I mean, look, I know that we all understand that we are in December and the election is not for, 11 months or so down the road. But how seriously do you take these polls and the fact that Nikki Haley, they say, would beat the president by 17 points?
As I've said on this program a number of times, I think any of these Republican candidates is equipped to defeat Joe Biden next year. We are 11 months out, as you've said, and frequently these are national polls, and so it isn't the same as a state-by-state polling, assessment. However, in states that matter, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Arizona, in Georgia, in Wisconsin, these Republican candidates, any of them, from Nikki Haley to Donald Trump to Ron DeSantis, are going to be able to best Joe Biden, I think, and I think it's only going to get better as Republicans unify around a presumptive nominee and a nominee going into the summer as we head, our Republican candidate goes head-to-head against Joe Biden.
You know, it's interesting because you say that eventually we, as in the Republican Party and conservatives, have to rally behind one candidate. So when you come across a poll like this, and I don't know if this has happened in the past, but, when you come across a poll like this, where if it's the primary, we know that Donald Trump is doing really, really, really well. Nikki Haley is a distant second. But then when you look at the national polling, it shows that Nikki Haley would more effectively, they say, beat Joe Biden. As a conservative and a Republican, what do you do with a poll like that? I mean, how do you decide which candidate to throw your support behind?
Well, I try not to, when I'm selecting a candidate in a Republican nominating contest, I try not to look at the polls, but the polls do provide good news for the candidates that they benefit. Those candidates use those polls to claim viability, to fundraise, all of that good stuff. But I think many Americans who are tuning in casually, either to the debates or to the headlines, will say, "Oh, Nikki Haley is ahead in the polls. That might be the horse in, my horse in the race." I think, though, again, as we get to the nominating era, so July and August, as people really start to pay attention, those voters who don't listen to talk radio, who vote only in presidential election years, will take notice. And again, I think, Nikki Haley is strong now. We're still several weeks out from Iowa, where Ron DeSantis has a good ground game. And others will come forward. These voters will come out of the woodwork, make their selection. And as we see Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada going into Super Tuesday, I think the picture will become more clear.
Matthew Hurtt joining us, Grassroots political analyst for Super Talk 99.7 and Nashville's Morning News. Do you think these debates are doing anything to help Nikki Haley and help Donald Trump? I mean, who's the winners and the losers in these debates? Because we are seeing in the national polling, and you rightly said that these are national polls versus, the state polls and the state breakdowns. But, is her performance in these debates helping her?
I think that a strong performance in any debate is helpful. The specter of these debates is the fact that Donald Trump isn't in any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so for most casual observers of politics, they say, well, the guy who's going to be the nominee isn't even at these debates. And depending upon how much longer we do this debate thing, really will decide if voters are paying attention to the absence of Donald Trump or if it makes a difference. I think right now, early in the first two debates, it was very clear that Donald Trump wasn't on stage. In fact, most of my friends in D.C., or many of my friends in D.C., said Donald Trump won the first and second debate, and he wasn't even there. But I think that diminished a little bit in the third and fourth debates, but it remains to be seen. I mean, I think that Donald Trump is someone who can stay in the news regardless of whether or not he shows up to a debate. And the people who support Donald Trump are fiercely loyal, many of whom came into this process in 2016. And as you and I have discussed on this show before, people who believe, and I think rightfully so, that the deck was stacked against him, and the infrastructure in D.C. and in these institutions was really stacked against him in a way that caused Americans to say, that's not right, and we're going to react and respond to that and support Donald Trump because of that, in part.
The story about Alex Jones, he's back on Twitter, and he's out there saying that Joe Biden is basically drugged up and walking around naked around the White House. Now, we already know that the president likes to skinny dip. I believe the president is on some sort of drugs, specifically when he's got to give a speech or what have you, to make him a little more coherent, a little bit more cognitively able to do what he needs to do. What do you think about this story from Alex Jones?
Well, Dan, you've been awake for a few more hours than I have, and I'm just into my first cup of morning coffee, and I really don't want to think about Joe Biden naked this morning. But I will say this, Elon Musk has created a free speech atmosphere at Twitter, and that has encouraged people like Alex Jones to come back. I think more speech is good speech. The more that different and diverse views are expressed on these platforms, the better. But it speaks to a larger point. Is Joe Biden fit for office? There's no doubt in my mind that he is on a cocktail of medications, and many of those may affect his behavior or the activity that he engages in. He just doesn't look fit to serve. And again, you and I have talked about this time and time again. As he's walking to speaking engagements, even what he says. The joke online over the weekend was it looks like Hunter Biden will be the only Biden to finish a sentence as he approaches his court system, all the charges against him. So it plays into the narrative. And again, I think rightfully so, that Joe Biden is unfit for office. He is the oldest man to inhabit the White House. And whereas Ronald Reagan could play that off as a joke, I don't think it is as successful with Joe, despite how folksy and relatable he tries to be.
Yeah, and you touched on, so I'll go ahead and do the dive into Hunter Biden. He has been indicted, and this is I'm going to say this is a very big deal, but here's my question, is that he has been indicted. One of the things that I would ask, though, is, okay, so he was set to testify. So basically, at this point now, there's two things going on. Number one is, will he plead the fifth? Will he refuse to come in and testify under oath and use these indictments as a way to get out of that testimony? That's number one. And number two, so in the overall scheme of things, these indictments are against Hunter Biden. Does that bring us any closer to an impeachment or perhaps an indictment of Joe Biden as well?
Well, what prosecutors try to do is stack charges. So I used to work in criminal justice reform, and we often see prosecutors at every level try to add on as many charges as possible so that the individual in question can plead down and take a lesser take a lesser offense, reduce sentence or reduce time or probation or something like that. And I think that may be what we're seeing here. This highlights a two-tiered legal system. The people who do have access to attorneys, to resources, and to a political infrastructure often get off with less than average Americans. The people who are listening to your program now, if they get involved in a legal fracas, they're going to be less well off in the process, and that is frustrating for people.
I think, yeah, go ahead, keep going.
Well, and Hunter Biden's sort of the activity he's engaged in, while it doesn't directly tie Joe Biden to him yet, I do think that it is, again, part of an overwhelming narrative of the Biden crime family. You know, anybody who's selling their art for hundreds of thousands of dollars with little to no talent, this looks like money laundering to me. And I think a lot of modern art especially is money laundering. But it's certainly something that should concern the American people and that will play out, and Republicans will use it in the election to paint Joe Biden as part of this crime syndicate.
One of the things is we talk about all of that. There's the paintings, there's Burisma, there's all of those accounts, those shell accounts. There's millions of dollars going through those shell accounts into the pockets of the Biden family, eventually going into Joe Biden's pockets. And so it does seem like there is a lot of evidence there. We'll have to see where that lands. One of the big stories from last week, these Ivy League presidents, you had UPenn, you had, I think, Harvard and MIT. Correct me if I'm wrong. I may be wrong on one of those. But, the outrage was that they simply would not condemn the anti-Semitism that is infiltrated their campus. And now you see some of these, specifically UPenn, some of these university presidents are being forced to resign. Obviously, at least to me, that's a very big deal and a good thing.
Bill Ackerman and Wall Street is leading the charge. For a long time, these folks who bankroll the American economy have been silent on controversial social issues. And finally, they're speaking up. We saw the pressure over the weekend come to a head at UPenn. Harvard had a board meeting over the weekend, and that is going to continue. I think the drumbeat for these presidents to resign will continue, but it just shows you for decades the American academia funneled millions and even billions of dollars from Wall Street into their coffers, into the accounts that make them as prestigious as they are. And they produced, what did they produce? Graduates who want to undermine the American capitalist system.
Yep.
And Western and what has made the West great for centuries. And finally, those chickens are coming home to roost, and I think people are paying attention. Matthew, how can folks find you on Twitter? I'm on Twitter right there with Alex Jones now, and you can find me at Matthew Hurtt, MattheWhurtt.